And it's a story of Samson. And if you go through this story, it's it reads like a TV soap opera, really. You go right down to it. Maybe a little more killing and all that stuff in it, but it reads like a soap opera. But there's a lot of good lessons that we can learn from Samson. And in chapter 13, it starts out, we're going to be going through 13 through 16. That's the story of Samson. And I want you to pay close attention to this very first verse in chapter 13. We're studying in the Old Testament on Sunday mornings, and one thing we realize from the Old Testament is God's people go up and down like this. It's like a roller coaster. And the very first verse here reads, "Again the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years." And then it goes on to say that there's a husband and wife that can't have a baby. "Now there was a certain man, Zorah, of the family of Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, 'Indeed now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines.'" Now the story goes on in scriptures, and I'm paraphrasing here, but her husband wants to actually find out whether this was an angel of God or whether this was true. You know, it's something fantastic that happened. It was something that was fantastic being said to them, that, you know, they were going to have a child. So the angel of the Lord comes to them again, and then the angel of the Lord, they decide to feed him, and he says, "No, don't feed me." They ask him what his name is. He won't give his name because he says that he doesn't want any worship or anything from them. But he said, "You can make a burnt offering to the Lord." So they make a burnt offering to the Lord, and the angel disappears in the flames. Now there's probably, I think, 3 other places in the Bible where the angel of the Lord comes to someone, or God comes to someone in flames. And that's the burning bush, and there's a few others. And then this one here, that's a messenger from God comes and talks. And then let's jump down to 24, verse 24. "So the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him." And then we're going to go into chapter 14. They have the baby. They don't know, if you had a son that was going to grow up to be the strongest man in the world, you wouldn't know it from him being a baby. So they didn't know any of this stuff that was going on. So in 14, he's grown, and he's going to go down to a foreign land, and he does. And in verse 1, it starts out, "Now Samson went down to Timnah, and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, 'I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughter of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife.'" Now it seems to me that Samson should probably pick a wife from his own people, especially the way God handles these things in the Old Testament. And his father and mother try to encourage him the same way. In the 3rd verse it reads, "Then his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, or among all the people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" Pay attention, young people, because the mate you pick is the one that you're going to have until death. And it's the same advice his mother and father is giving to him, is that be careful picking your mate. It's one of the lessons we can learn from this. But went on, and Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." So him being a spoiled brat, because he's the only son, father gives in to him. That's paraphrasing there. But we have to realize also, here's another thing we have to realize, is that it is God's will. And God's will, God uses certain characters, certain candidates out of the Bible that aren't very religious, aren't very, they're not, as we would say today, Christian. They don't act like Christians. But he uses them to do different things. And let's continue in verses 7 through 9. Then he went down and he talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see a carcass of a lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. So he took some in his hand and went along eating. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate it. Now, right before this, actually, they went down to that foreign land, and Samson ripped this lion to bits. It attacked him in the garden, and he ripped it to bits and threw its carcass out there. And with the heat and everything, you know, the carcass would blow up, and then the bees would get inside, and that wasn't something that was unheard of. He was able to do that. So he was eating the honey, and he went along and gave it, and he never told his mother and father about the attack of the lions. He never told him that the Lord's power came upon him, and he was able to kill the lion. And in 12 through 14, then Samson said to them, and this is his wife, his new wife's brothers, and his her countrymen. And you know how men are, when kids are, boys are. I mean, they're young men. They get together, and what do they try to do? They try to outdo each other, right? I dare you to do this. I dare you to do that. Well, Samson's out of his element too, because he's in with a bunch of people that aren't even related to him. You see what I mean? So he's there, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to give you a riddle to figure out. And if you figure out this riddle, I'll give you 30 pieces of linen and 30 changes of clothes." Now he's talking about underwear and all. 30 changes of clothes. And if you can't do it within the 7 days of this feast, then you're going to have to give me 30 clothes to wear. So they said to him, "Go ahead and pose your riddle." And he says to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." Now for 3 days they couldn't explain the riddle. Samson's wife, she kept trying to get this riddle from him. And finally, her countrymen, now this is pretty bad, but her countrymen call her off to the side and say, "We're going to burn your family's house down if you don't give us this riddle." So, in verse 17, now she had wept on him the 7 days while the feast lasted. We call that nagging, is what we call it. And men can do it too. It's not just something women do, but we call it nagging nowadays. But she nagged him, and she cried on him for 7 days. And finally, he gave in. It happened on the 7th day that he gave her the answer to the riddle. Now, she shows her real love to him, right? Because she goes and gives this answer to these riddles to her countrymen. I think she was trouble from the beginning, to be honest with you, but he loved her. In verse 18, it tells us that, so the men of the city, after finding out what the riddle and the answer to the riddle was, as she told them, and they come up with the answer, and that is, what's sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion? And Samson hits the nail on the head in verse 18 also. He says, that's the answer, and he says to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." That's what he thought of the woman that he was married to. So Samson pays them back by going down and killing 30 of their countrymen and taking their clothes up and giving it to them. And Samson left the heifer, his wife. He left her and went back home. Now something came upon him, I don't know what it was, but he decided to try to go back and take her back. But she had already been given to his best man. Love is blind, that's what they said. So he goes back down and he tries to get her back. Father won't give her up because she's already been given to another man. And his anger burns within him. And one thing I learned from this story is, you do not want to get Samson mad. And Samson said to them, this time I'm going to be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them. Because in other words, they won't give me my wife back. I can't get what I want. Then Samson went down and caught 300 foxes and took torches. He tied the tails together, took torches, stuck them in the tails, and then ran them through the grain fields and destroyed all their food, all the grain of the Philistines, and their vineyards and their olive groves. So the Philistines come up and ask, who did this? And they're told that Samson, the son-in-law of Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given him to his companion. And I told you, this story is pretty graphic. So they burned her and her father with fire, is what they did. So Samson was mad again, so he goes and kills a bunch of them, and it was a great slaughter. It doesn't give us any numbers, but he kills a bunch of them. I jumped a little bit ahead there. He's going to be arrested by them, and his own countrymen tie him up with new ropes and take him down. But they had to promise him that they would not kill him. So in verse 14 through 16, it lets us know that the Philistines came and shouted against him, and he just broke the ropes off like they were strings. It's described as flax being burned by in other words, it's like a flat brown thing of flax, and it was burned by a fire. It will ignite really quickly because it's really dry. And again, he gets angry at him, so he picks up a jawbone of a donkey and kills 1,000 men with it. And then he says this, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. Now he's saying this in a general way, but he's talking about the 1,000 men that he killed and piled them up in heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. And one lesson we can learn here is God's strength can do anything. And after all that work of killing those men, he got thirsty, so he begs the Lord. And he really kind of gets arrogant with God. You know, I've done all this work and I've killed all these men and I need water. But the Lord went ahead and gave him water. And then all the people that God uses aren't really sometimes the best, and some of them make mistakes. And Samson went down in chapter 16, and he lies with a harlot. And the men of the city surround the city, and they say, well, when he comes out, we're going to kill him. God gave him supernatural strength. I don't know whether you realize how big a gate of a city is, but it could be as large as probably that back wall for them to be able to go in and out of and to be able to get things through. He takes the gate of the city up by its post and the bars and everything that's on it, puts it on his shoulders and runs out of the city and runs it up on the next hill. And then he meets another problem woman, Delilah, in verse 4. And he falls in love with her. And her countrymen make a deal with them, and that's in verse 4. Entice him, find out where his strength comes from, and we'll each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. But then Samson decides to play a trick on her here. In verse 7, he tells her just to, bind him up with 7 bowstrings, not yet dried, then I'll become weak, and I'll be like any other man. She did it. They came in to grab him, and he broke them off and ran them out. Another lesson we can learn here is never fall asleep with an evil woman. Then he tells her to bind him with new rope that have never been used. That didn't work either. And then he tells her, if you weave my hair, my 7 locks of my head into the web of a loom, that'll work. And that didn't work either. Then 15 and 16 is pretty classic when you read it. Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass when she pestered him or nagged him daily with her words and pressed him. So he was vexed. He wanted to die. He wanted death to come. That's how much she pestered him. But she finally told him that it was his hair that was giving him strength. Now, what really was it that gave him the strength? God. His hair didn't have anything to do with it. But the hair was the part of the oath that he took, the Nazirite oath that he took. And he had the oath, there's 4 points to it. There's not drinking of liquor, not cutting your hair, not eating unclean things, and the 4th one just left me. I forget what it was now. There's 4 things that they have to do. And so she lulls him into a sleep on her knees. She lays his head on her knee. He lays his head on her knees, and she has the men come in and shave his head. And once he is shaved, in 19 it says, but he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And then verse 21 is a real classic too. She starts to torment him. So then the ending of the story is a very powerful ending, because they're all crowded into Dagon's temple. They're on the roof. There's thousands of people there. And they were drinking. And they said, oh, let's bring Samson out and we'll make fun of him. We'll have him perform for us. Well, they had blinded him. He was blind. So when they brought him out, he performed for them. Now, it doesn't say how he performed for them, but it does tell us that he did perform. But he tells the lad that brought him out to let me touch the pillars of the temple. And his hair in the meantime in the prison had started growing back. And they're making fun of him, and they're having fun. They're drunk, they're liquored up. And the last part of the chapter, 16, says, then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on the right and the other on the left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all his might. And the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it, so that the dead that he killed that day was more than he had killed in his whole lifetime. God wanted to free his people from the Philistines, and he used all these people to do it. And the lessons we can learn is, in the end, what did Samson do? He talked to God. He asked God, give me back my power this one more time, and I'll do your bidding. This is his bidding. This is what he had planned from the very beginning for Samson to do. And what we should get from this is we should always depend on God's strength. He should always be our source of strength. Never trust our own. And men and women, as I mentioned, young people, watch who you pick as a mate. And make sure that they're the ones that you should live with for the rest of your life. And watch your temper. Your temper can get you into a lot of trouble. And don't seek revenge. At the end of each service, we offer a way for you to be able to get into the great salvation of Jesus. And one thing I want to say to you today, remember, we must go by the teaching and example of him, Jesus. That's who we must go by the example of. He was baptized by immersion. We were baptized by immersion. We were immersed for the remission of our sins. He had no sin. He instituted the Lord's Supper, which we are told to take every first day of the week, which we just took this morning. Also, God wants us to worship him as often as we can. And sometimes it just becomes a convenience to us. If I don't have anything else to do, then I'll be at church. But he wants us here every time the doors are open. If you have a need this morning to be baptized, or if you have a need to come forward and get the prayers of the church, please come as we stand and sing. There's a fountain free just for you and me. Let us sing so haste to its spring. 'Tis the fount of love from the source above, and he bids us all freely drink. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty souls.